So New Hampshire takes a bad rap for being uh, non-progressive socially, and I don't think that's necessarily true. Uh, New Hampshire is quite often uh, interested in what goes on outside and is willing to adopt stuff that works. But let somebody else incur the costs of learning. So, in any event, New Hampshire, for example, in terms of education, the first funding was in 1789. And going from there, there were various regulatory measures through the 19th century, up to including the state certification of all teachers in 1895. Prior to that, you saw talented young men, usually men, who had a little extra book learning, like they'd be taking a break from college or something, and they'd teach, were hired to teach school. Daniel Webster was a big example of that. He and his brother tag teamed each other, putting each other through college, and they'd take turns teaching school to finance that. There were, in fact, the founding of a couple of schools. The Plymouth Normal School, now Plymouth State University, was founded in 1870. I think, I don't know if we have any Plymouth students in the class this summer, but I always give my son grief. He is a PSU grad, and I always refer to it in the most irritating way possible as Plymouth Normal School, implying that he's not. We won't get into the merits of that. There was also Keene Normal School in 1909, and prior to that, remember that John Wentworth, the younger, actually chartered Dartmouth College in 1767, and in 1866, the Land Grant College, which was a state-supported university, was founded actually in Hanover. Actually, some of the classes were right across the street from one another. And professors would teach the class on one side of the street, cross the street, and do the next class. Anyway, in 1891, Benjamin Thompson left what was then a huge amount of money, $800,000, and a bunch of land down in Durham. And the state actually by 1893 had opened the University of New Hampshire. As the 20th century wound on, the United States got involved in the Spanish-American War. New Hampshire raised a regiment, basically approximately 1,300. It was a very short-lived effort, and the major casualties in that effort were sustained when typhoid broke out. Basically, at that time, they hadn't quite gotten the hang of not pooping where you're getting your water. Anyway, they ended up deploying to Puerto Rico. Other impacts of New Hampshire in world affairs in 1904 and 1905, President Theodore Roosevelt actually mediated the treaty with between the Russians and the Japanese, ending the Russo-Japanese War, and that mediation took place in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, Portsmouth Navy Yard. Portsmouth was a lot cooler. If you've ever been to Washington, D.C. in the summer, it's bad enough. Imagine it without air conditioning. Portsmouth was a lot better. In addition, in the United States involvement in World War I, there was New Hampshire participated in the initial stages of the war before the United States got involved. New Hampshire manufacturing was selling stuff hand over fist to anybody who had cash, that, for example, one shoemaker provided shoes to Russia, Italy, Germany, and France. That just about covers it. You can imagine the Escape mills were going great guns, when the United States entered World War I, about 20,000 men saw service, and I think, interestingly, the people in New Hampshire bought $80 million in government securities. Remember, this is real money, not the stuff we're getting now. That's significant because it was about a fifth of the entire wealth of the state. So New Hampshire put its money where its mouth was. On the home front, a lot of disused farms were put back into service, and during the short duration of the war, the New Hampshire increased its food production, which was a vital thing, since we were feeding not only the United States but Europe, and increased food production by a third. Not sure how that would have worked out over the long term. Anyway, commercial shipbuilding continued in Portsmouth, including wooden ships, which were useful because they didn't use steel and weren't as subject to mines. The Great Influenza Epidemic, not this one. This is the one of 1918 through 1920, impacted New Hampshire. Worldwide, about 500 million people were infected. Consider that the world population was something like 2 billion at the time. There were 50 to 100 million dead, and of those, 700,000 were Americans in New Hampshire. The statistics are a little fuzzy because they weren't sure what was influenza related or not, but anywhere between 1,600 and 3,000 people died in that epidemic. The response was fairly similar to what we've seen in the coronavirus panic in the last few months. A lot of things were shut down, meetings and whatnot, and certainly where people were concentrated, it was a difficult, it was a more serious issue. One of the things was that immediately after World War I, there was in New Hampshire a Red Scare. That is, there was a fear of an attempted communist socialist takeover. New Hampshire had some participation in that. This was there was a lot of panic about communism at the time, not saying it wasn't justified, but the immigrants from the Eastern Europe were suspected of having communist leanings. And this was fanned by the immigrants having prominent roles in socialist and labor movements. Nationwide, there were about 10,000 arrests. There was a concentration of people in New Hampshire, over in the western part of the state, in Claremont, Sullivan County. You had places like Sullivan Machinery and Claremont Paper. There was a raid in Claremont where a bunch of literature was seized. They thought it was communist propaganda. When they got it translated, it turned out they were religious tracts. So anyway, approximately 23 were arrested, 3 were deported, and there were also later through the period arrests in places ranging from Berlin to Manchester to Portsmouth. Nashville was one of the big places. One of the effects of this has been the hostility to labor unions and labor organizers.